2 Britons and 1 Moroccan sentenced to death prepare appeals in Ukraine. And China's President Xi Jinping calls Russia-Ukraine war an alarm for humanity. Ukraine is set to be approved as a European Union candidate at a Brussels summit today after the European Commission gave the green light. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky hailed the European Union's expected offer of candidate status for his battle-weary nation, just as Russian forces pounded Ukraine's second biggest city, Kharkiv, and the eastern Donbas region. The Russian strikes in the last 2 days on Kharkiv, near the Russian border, were the worst for weeks in an area where normal life had been returning since Ukraine pushed Moscow's forces back last month. Speaking in his usual evening video address, Mr. Zelensky said how he had been conversing with European leaders since early this morning for the sake of a positive decision on the candidacy for Ukraine, with talks expected to continue. Diplomats say it will take Ukraine a decade or more to meet the criteria for joining the European Union, but EU leaders say the bloc must make a gesture that recognizes Ukraine's sacrifice.
Since early this morning, I have continued the phone call marathon for the sake of a positive decision on the candidacy for Ukraine. Tomorrow, I will continue similar marathon. We must ensure maximum support to our state. The key European decision is expected by tomorrow night. Massive air and artillery strikes in Donbass. The occupiers' goal in this direction is unchanged. They want to destroy the entire Donbass step by step. The whole Lysychansk, Sloviansk, Kramatorsk, every city. They need to make everything like Mariupol. Completely destroyed. This is why we again and again emphasize the acceleration of armed deliveries to Ukraine. What is quickly needed is parity on the battlefield in order to halt this diabolical armada and push it behind Ukraine's borders.
Earlier, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said Ukraine deserves the candidate status, adding that it was up to Ukraine and fellow declared candidates Moldova and Georgia to make progress. Mrs. von der Leyen said an institution like the EU brings together leaders to decide whether it formally accepts the 3 countries' candidacy. Ukraine applied to join the EU 4 days after Russian troops poured across the border in February. Another 4 days later, so did Moldova and Georgia, smaller ex-Soviet states also contending with separatist regions backed by Russia. Though only the start of a process that may take many, many years and requires extensive reforms to conform with a host of standards ranging from judicial policy to financial services and food safety, the EU decision puts Kiev on course to realize an aspiration that would have been out of reach just months ago.
Our opinion stems from a careful and thorough assessment on the reality on the ground. And this evidence tells us that Ukraine, the opinion of the Commission, deserves a European perspective. It deserves the candidate status, of course on the understanding that the country will carry out a number of further important reforms. How far Ukraine, Moldova and Georgia will come and how quickly they proceed will depend first and foremost on their actions and their progress. It's a merit-based approach. But how we respond to their passion and their progress is our choice and ours only. This Parliament has clearly spoken, loud and audible, and I would like to thank you for that again. It is now up to the European Council to decide and to live up to the historic responsibility we are confronted with.
A Ukrainian official overseeing the country's push to join the EU has said she is 100% certain all 27 EU nations will approve Ukraine's candidacy. Deputy Prime Minister for European and Euro-Atlantic Integration, Olha Stefanishyna, said the Netherlands, Sweden and Denmark had been skeptical about starting accession talks with Ukraine while it is fighting Russia's invasion, but are now supportive. Asked how confident she was that Ukraine would be accepted as an EU candidate, she said, the day before the summit starts, I can say 100%. And meanwhile, an advisor to President Zelensky, Oleksiy Arestovich, has said that the fight for the twin cities of Severodonetsk and Lysychansk is entering a sort of fearsome climax as Russian forces intensify their push to take the Donbass. The governor of Luhansk has said Russian forces captured another 2 villages yesterday, Loshkutiva, about 25 kilometers south of Lysychansk, and another village closer to the towns of Sloviansk and Kramatorsk. Serhiy Haidar said Ukraine's forces were still holding their positions in Severodonetsk, where a Russian shelling caused a fire in the fiberglass factory. He said the Russian army was liberating Severodonetsk from life and jobs. A Russian state news agency TASS has reported that 2 British nationals and a Moroccan held in the pro-Russian self-proclaimed Donetsk People's Republic are preparing their death sentence appeals. British citizens Sean Pina and Aiden Arslan and Moroccan Ibrahim Sadoun were sentenced to death earlier this month after being accused of being mercenaries for Ukraine. Authorities said the 3 men were foreign fighters who had been apprehended by Russian forces in the southern city of Mariupol in April. Russian state media outlet RIA Novosti had reported that Pina, Arslan and Sadoun would be shot. However, Pina's lawyer told TASS her team is preparing documents to file an appeal, adding that if it's rejected, a petition for clemency would also be filed. And Chinese leader Xi Jinping has said the conflict in Ukraine has sounded an alarm for humanity, but gave no indication on how it could be resolved. Beijing has not condemned Moscow's invasion of Ukraine on February the 24th and has criticized Western-led sanctions on Russia, even as it has sought to maintain its relationship with Ukraine. According to him, countries will surely end up in security hardships if they place blind faith in their positions of strength, expand military alliances, and seek their own safety at the expense of others. The Chinese president, who did not propose any solutions, was speaking at the opening of a virtual business forum ahead of the 14th summit of the BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. In the United States, there is hope that there will soon be a positive resolution of the issues between Turkey, Finland, and Sweden regarding the NATO accession bids of the 2 Nordic countries, according to the State Department. Karen Dunford, Assistant Secretary for Europe and Eurasian Affairs, speaking at the Senate Foreign Relations hearing, said the U.S. was certainly pushing to get all parties on the same page before next week's NATO summit in Madrid. And German Chancellor Olaf Scholz says NATO partners in Eastern Europe could rely on Germany as it was re-equipping its army such that it could defend allies as well as itself against all future attacks. In a speech to Parliament about the upcoming European Union, G7 and NATO summits, Mr. Scholz said the EU's biggest economy and most populous country is taking on a very special responsibility. Mr. Scholz also said he would work hard at the upcoming EU summit so that the entire EU will be unanimously saying yes to Ukraine receiving candidate status for the European Union. The German Chancellor also spoke in support of the Western Balkans, telling Parliament the EU must finally give the green light for accession talks with Albania and North Macedonia. Moscow authorities have renamed an intersection adjoining the U.S. Embassy after a Russian-backed breakaway territory of Ukraine, after the embassy welcomed a previous proposal to call it that. Knocking down a proposal to call it Defenders of Donbass Square, previously welcomed by the U.S. Embassy, the city government said the name Donetsk People's Republic Square had come top in an online poll. Workers were already putting up street signs with the new name directly outside the embassy complex located near the home of the Russian government in central Moscow. Russia says one of the reasons it sent its troops into Ukraine on February the 24th, aiming, amongst other things, to price the Donbas region out of Kiev's control, was to protect its Russian speakers from persecution. The previous proposal had produced a wary response from the embassy, suggesting that defenders of Donbass were the Ukrainian soldiers fighting Russian aggression. The country should know its heroes. Africa's response to the war in Ukraine has been mixed because of the various countries' relationships with Russia. However, the response has been important, and this comes from the Ukrainian ambassador to South Africa, Lyubov Abrativa. The ambassador told Channels Television's South African bureau chief, Betty Dibia, that her country still counts on Africa to support efforts to stop the war, given the ties that date way back to the days of the Soviet Union's liberation support.
The African reaction and approach is very important. It is 54 countries that are not expressing their view in single voice. And we've seen this split of opinions during the vote in the United Nations. And we see the dependence of some of the governments on the Russian decision makers. But I think that the address of the president of Ukraine, the recent one to the Board of African Union, was important to be heard by every single country, whatever level of representation was at that platform at that time. And I believe that this is a kind of lakmus paper today for a lot of African democracies to show their real adherence to the values that they were suffering through in their histories, to show and prove to their population that those values that they are declaring during their elections or preparation to the elections, that they are fair and true.
Let's talk to our South Africa Bureau Chief, Betty Dibia, joins us from Johannesburg. Morning to you, Betty.
Morning, Laddie.
Let's, I know the weather is quite inclement there. You told me that a bit earlier, so that's why we're taking you on audio only. But let's talk a bit about the effect of this war in South Africa. One thing that is clear is that there are differences in how this has affected people. But in South Africa, one obvious way is that we have higher energy costs. How are people dealing with that?
How can people deal with it? I don't know if you can hear me.
Very loud and clear.
All right. First issue of energy costs. People have are grappling with the soaring costs, not just high. Soaring costs, we're dealing with petrol, for example. We're talking about 24, and we've been told to brace up for up to 30 if this continues. You have water crisis. You have, as I'm sitting in the dark right now in my area because we're having rolling blackouts. But that's not just because of the war. We've had issues with Eskom and the management of Eskom as well. So it's tough. Higher food prices, definitely, although food security-wise, South Africa may fare better than most countries because it has far more mechanized agricultural and diverse agricultural sector compared to most of Africa. So, but the shelves, on the shelves, food prices are much higher. And high unemployment rate. The CPI, that's the Consumer Price Index, that's cost of living index, was released just yesterday and is at a 5-year high, standing at 6.5%, compared to, that's for May, compared to February, March, which was standing at 5.9%, which was still high. So, so many issues in the country. High interest rate, high unemployment rate, issue of corruption. The last part of the Zondo Commission report was released today. So the government is dealing with a lot. And then just getting people to feed, a high crime rate as well. So it's telling on the average life of people. And I know it's not just the war, the economy had been struggling, if we'll make that clear, but it's getting even more difficult. Just today, we heard that Tiger Brands, for example, it's about to close down its canning factory in the Western Cape. That means 4,500 jobs added to the job market. If new investors are not able to raise the 300 million rand that is required to keep it afloat. So these are some of the issues that people are dealing with, and it's not getting any funny.
It's a double whammy of sorts, because as you referenced, we were coming already from a situation that was fairly precarious even before COVID-19 hit. And South Africa was particularly badly hit by COVID-19. And just as it seemed as if, you know, there was some kind of respite from that and there was a move towards recovery, then you had this situation in Ukraine. And you've referenced food prices, energy costs, soaring energy costs and all of that. What's been the government reaction? Have there been attempts to kind of offer relief, as we've seen in some other places, to the people who are hardest hit, those in the middle, those at the bottom of the pyramid, so to speak, and who are bearing probably the brunt of all of this, both in terms of their food supplies, transportation costs, and, as you referenced, unemployment?
South Africa is one, I don't know if it's the only country in Africa that has been providing social grants for the citizens who are vulnerable, let me put it that way. Old, young, for every child born here to a citizen, you get a grant. And added to that, they added COVID relief, about 350. They've had hiccups with that, but how much difference will that make for people to just depend on that? It can't go too far. So the pain is still there for everyone, and government struggling to keep the economy. The issue of energy, for example, if I'll go back there, we heard the Minister for Petroleum, the Minister for Minerals, Gwede Mantashe, talking about probably reaching out to Russia to buy cheaper oil. That, of course, that caused a debate. That was in Parliament. Or going greener, you know, as the German Chancellor who visited here talked about with them, greener sources of energy. And then again, he raised the issue of the sonic blasting that people took them to court for, you know, trying to get oil prospecting companies to go in an area. There's a belt from Namibia down to South Africa's wild coast, where, you know, they're prospecting for oil, fossil fuel. So environmentalists are going against that it could hurt marine life. It's off the coast, the wild coast of South Africa. The government is grappling. Then the issue of corruption, what has been stolen again, keeps rearing its head. I don't even know which direction, but many people are worried, just like in most countries as well. So I won't single out South Africa, but government is struggling here, and the people are demanding more, they're expecting more. How all that will be solved, nobody knows. But on a positive note, today the health minister announced that there's scrapping of all restrictions, you know, COVID restrictions that have been put in place. Maybe some industries will now be helped, or they will have some hope of doing more business. That's the good part, although all the other factors will still affect such industries as well.
I referenced that at the start, and so did you, when we talked about the weather situation and the fact that you are having a rolling blackouts. One of the things that has been the reaction or the aftermath of the very situation with the weather has been flooding, which has also exacerbated poverty and has created particular situations. I remember your coverage of what happened. I believe that was in
KwaZulu-Natal.
Exactly.
KwaZulu-Natal.
Absolutely. Now, have people tended to recover from that, or is this situation, in fact, making their situation, which was already bad, worse? What's been the coping mechanism, if I may use that phrase?
This is hard to say, but you know, interestingly, in KwaZulu-Natal at the moment, they're dealing with a water crisis. access to water is a problem that the provincial government is dealing with at the moment, then economically, generally, there's a problem. Durban now has hosted a couple of conferences. The scrapping of this may help the economy of the province, but generally, again, you can't separate them from what's going on in the country generally. So they have the issue of housing is still a problem. Some people being rehoused, there are controversies, there are scandals. Is this right for the people? Is this okay? Private efforts too in rehousing some of the people affected, but it's a mess, and government is saying that they're trying to make things better, but it is struggling. Visibly, it is struggling.
The people, of course, are reacting to this mainly economic crisis caused by COVID and by this war and so on, by seemingly focusing attention on those who are in the country illegally, or in some cases even legally. I hate to use the term xenophobia, but some people already are using that term. They're going after lorry drivers who they say are employed by companies that are foreigners, and the authorities themselves seem to be taking a dim view of this situation because of the economic pressure. Is that a fair comment?
I don't understand what you just asked.
No, what I meant is that it appears as if there's an economic pressure on the country, and that citizens have taken out that pressure on foreigners,
Definitely.
those who are from outside, who are not South Africans, but who had been living in South Africa.
Definitely. That has been openly said for some time. The lower level street vendors being accused of taking up the spaces that locals have can take to do their business. I don't know how true this can be, but then the issue of the truck drivers that you talked about, we had a spell a year or two ago where you had people throwing Molotov cocktails, fire bombs into trucks, saying that the truck owners are employing foreign nationals. The Minister for Home Affairs, Minister of Transport, met with some of the truck owners, and they're trying to calm the situation down, because we had a blockade of the N3, which is a major road from Durban, for example, to Johannesburg, where you have exports, imports flowing through. A blockade for about 2 days. That has been cleared out. They're trying to calm the situation. And then you have the likes of the Operation Dudula movement, which Dudula means to uproot, where they're going after street vendors. They're saying within the townships, you have to remove foreign nationals. But again, when I spoke to a political analyst like Moletsi Mbeki, he said, look, this is happening because the leaders have failed the people. The ANC leadership, he's not shy about that, despite being the brother to former President Thabo Mbeki. But he said people are turning to those who they can reach immediately, directly, because their leaders have failed them. If the structures in place to support growth and development of the people are really in place and oiled rightly, people won't be doing the things that they're doing and looking at who is selling vegetables on the street. So at the end of the day, political leadership, political or governance, I think governance is the word. Governance or the government failing the people is the reason why some of these things are happening. So you turn around to the closest person who is around you, who happens to be a foreign national. We had an incident recently in the Eastern Cape as well. I think it's the Ethiopian or Somali or so national who was here, and the people went up in arms saying, no, we can't accept that. But this is happening and it's spreading. It's been there, but now it's getting out in the open. I don't know if government is doing enough to curb that, but I think good governance is what will actually solve the problem. When people are hearing issues of corruption daily, the president is mad in one. I'm not saying he's guilty, but everyone is looking at him for answers. The issue of of money found at his farm, Para farm in Limpopo province. So these are some good governance and just some general support of the people may just make people calm down and not think that the next foreign national is the problem.
Indeed. Thank you for your reporting this morning, Betty, and do stay safe. The weather situation, the economic pressure, and of course all that you've been reporting. Do stay safe. Do stay safe.
Thank you. Thank you.
After the break, Kaliningrad residents expressed mixed views on Lithuania's ban on transit goods. Please join us again. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. Inflation rate in Arab countries is expected to rise to approximately 7.5% in 2022, compared to 5.7% in 2021, reflecting the impact of international supply chain challenges and the rise in the prices of agricultural and industrial commodities, as well as energy products due to the ongoing war in Ukraine. In the United Arab Emirates, customers are feeling the pinch in their pockets as prices in the transport, hospitality sectors all rise. Our correspondent, Maiwa Adegoke, tells us more in our next report from Dubai.
Has not shielded its economy from the impact of the resulting global crisis.
You guys.
Inflation in the country is up 3.3%, while consumer price index jumped to 102.70 points in first quarter 2022, compared to 99.37 points in the year-ago period. Fuel prices have been increased over 3 times since January, causing prices of transportation and logistics to climb by over 22%.
Other sets of products that we see that the prices are beginning to go up are those products that need refrigeration while in transit, such as the frozen goods or the fresh farm items, which would need extra energy to keep them fresh in order for it to get down here to our destination. We're seeing prices increase in certain sectors as well.
Timothy Olatoke is founder of Ojemia, an online marketplace operating out of Dubai. He's been following changes in the supply chain between buyers and suppliers.
People are still buying regardless, but the shift that we're having in the market is we're seeing more and more smaller businesses starting up. And we're seeing a lot of families and friends now co-sharing and buying together in bulk in order for them to reduce the overall costs to their basket.
In the hospitality sector, prices at restaurants and hotels, as well as food and soft drinks, have also risen by 6.7% and 5.4% respectively. Not good news for end users, but it's likely to get worse.
I mean, the kind of shift that we've seen in the food spending patterns, consumption and production, prices are expected to remain elevated for at least till the end of 2024.
It's not all bad news in the UAE. Dubai's real estate sector is enjoying a boom that's partly credited to the influx of Russians seeking safe haven.
Currently, we're seeing a lot of Russian buyers, Ukrainian buyers flooding into the Dubai real estate market, thereby increasing the demand of property in Dubai.
Dubai saw $35 billion worth of property market transactions in 2021, the highest recorded since the global financial crisis. Industry experts say that record will be broken again at the end of the year as more Russians look to the UAE to safeguard their wealth. From Dubai in the United Arab Emirates, Maiwa Adegoke for Channels Television.
Maiwa joins me now from Dubai. Maiwa, good morning to you. Nice to see you.
And good afternoon. It's good to see you as well.
Oh, good. Thank you for the correction. So it's afternoon we're in Dubai. But let me ask you, what's been the reaction to this 3 times higher oil prices? Some of the people I had spoken to earlier had suggested that well, you guys are sitting on top of so much oil, there shouldn't be higher energy costs there in Dubai, but apparently they're wrong, right?
They're definitely wrong because, and you know, the politics at play behind the scenes. So we are affected as well. We're not immune to what's going on globally. The good thing, in a way, is that the government would usually announce when the price is going to be hiked again. And so we would see long queues, as you would see sometimes in Lagos or in parts of Nigeria. You'd see long queues just before the price goes up because people are trying to fill their tanks and just take advantage of the lower price just before it goes up. However, ultimately, you have to live with the new price, and people have to figure out a way to go about it. For those who have cars, who drive long distance, I can imagine what they are going through right now. And so everyone knows what's going on globally, and good thing is it's not as bad, right? And so the UAE has oil, so we're enjoying, you know, in a way, because prices have gone up, so we're enjoying on that part. But because we're heavily dependent on imported products, then we feel the pinch because prices have to go up. So it's a mix. It's a mix.
Are the authorities there, shall we say, helping to cushion this blow? Because the citizens have nothing to do with it; they're just victims. So, what are the authorities doing? Are they actually coming up with schemes like we've seen elsewhere to help the citizens, you know, manage the changes in prices and how that is affecting the pockets?
Well, as of now, there are no schemes announced. However, I would say that because the impact is felt, but is not as bad, for instance, as if you compare what's going on in Nigeria and prices, you know, going double, triple. So it's not that bad. If you look at public transportation, for instance, prices are still the same. So perhaps people who would like to use taxis, private taxis, will now consider using the metro, because now the metro, the price is still the same. So you might consider using the metro or the public bus. So those are some of the things we're seeing. However, the Minister of Energy, as reportedly said, that we're nowhere near the peak. Prices may, you know, are still very likely to go up. And that's because China's demand is not in full swing just yet. And that's because they are going through, you know, lockdowns. Once China is back up and demand is high from China, that would definitely be another blow. And so everyone's sort of bootstrapping and expecting that anything might happen anytime soon.
There are things that came out hard and fast in your reporting. The first is that people are crowd buying. I came up with that phrase myself. They're crowd buying. They're bringing together different people and they're making bulk purchases and sharing it. How's that working out?
Well, you know, funny, on a personal note, that's something that my family has also considered before now. We found out that it was cheaper to buy things in the local market, but then we ended up with so much, right? You bought for less, but ended up so much. So we considered, you know what, let's come together with friends, because I personally don't like wastage. So let's come together, let's buy and share. And if that culture is coming up now, I think it's good. And I'm sure people in their individual lives and spaces will figure out the dynamics of how that works. If that's not what you're doing, perhaps you're then having to consider, what do I need now? And what do I not need now? Or if your finances are in good shape, then you buy as you like.
Now, the other thing that came out in the report, of course, is the issue of property prices. And in this particular instance, both Russians and Ukrainians are buying up property in Dubai. And that has had impact on the prices of the properties there. Tell us a bit more about that.
Well, I can tell you for free that rent has gone up across board. And again, because as mentioned, it's partly due to the influx of Russians and Ukrainians, but you must track back and remember that they just concluded the expo, which they delivered, you know, brilliantly in March, and that impressed thousands, millions across the world. They recorded 24 million visits, and 1 in every 3 visitors was actually a foreigner. So a lot of people are looking to come here, settle here, do business here. that also jacks up the demand, right? So it's on one end the expo, and another end this crisis going on that's driving people in, and innocent people like me are forced to pay more rent. But again, everyone knows what's happening in the world. We're not immune and we're not ignorant, and so ultimately it's figure it out in your personal space. How are you going to manage this?
Indeed, innocent you, and the other phrase, of course, is unintended consequences. Maiwa, thank you for your reporting, and do continue to stay safe out there.
Thank you very much.
Residents of Kaliningrad region sandwiched between the EU and NATO members Poland and Lithuania were unfazed by Lithuania's transit ban. The EU sanctions list notably includes coal, metals, construction materials and advanced technology, and the ban would cover around 50% of the items that Kaliningrad imports. The deputy CEO of Spar Kaliningrad chain of grocery stores, Alexei Alev, says the situation is calm in grocery retail, with no increase in turnover compared to the data of a week or a month ago, adding that these sanctions do not apply to food products as well as a significant range of household non-food products. And President Vladimir Putin has said that Russia was in the process of rerouting its trade and oil exports to its countries from the BRICS group of emerging economies in the wake of Western sanctions over Ukraine. The BRICS countries comprise Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. The West has imposed sweeping sanctions on Russia, including restrictions on imports of its oil, after the Kremlin sent its troops into Ukraine on February the 24th. In order to weather the sanctions, Russia is trying to forge closer ties with Asia, seeking to supplant the markets it lost in the row with the European Union and the United States. In a video addressed to the BRICS Business Forum participants, Mr. Putin said Russia was discussing increasing the presence of Chinese cars on the Russian market, as well as the opening of Indian supermarket chains. Mr. Putin also said Russia was developing alternative mechanisms for international financial settlements jointly with its BRIC partners.
Важно, что несмотря на все проблемы и трудности,
contacts between Russian business circles and the business community of the BRICS countries are being activated. For example, negotiations are underway to open Indian supermarket chains in Russia to increase the share of Chinese cars, equipment and machinery in our market. In turn, the Russian presence in the countries of the five is expanding. The volumes of the Russian oil deliveries to China and India are growing noticeably. Cooperation in the field of agriculture is developing dynamically. Russia exports significant volumes of fertilizers to the BRICS countries. Russian companies are expanding their activities in India and South Africa, and our satellites are already providing TV broadcasts to 40 million people in Brazil. Together with BRICS partners, reliable alternative mechanisms for international payments are being developed. The Russian financial messaging system is open to connecting banks from the five countries. There is an expansion of the geography of use of the Russian payment system, MIR. The issue of creating an international reserve currency based on a basket of currencies of our countries is being worked out. Russian circles, in coordination with the business communities of the BRICS states, are taking prompt steps to develop transport infrastructure, rebuild logistics routes, and create new production chains.
Have agreed to continue discussing a potential safe corridor in the Black Sea to export grain from Ukraine after talks in Moscow. The talks were led by generals assigned to operate a hotline between Ankara, Moscow, and Kiev to seek a solution to the crisis, according to the Russian Defense Ministry and Turkey's state broadcaster. Ukraine is one of the top wheat suppliers globally, but its shipments have been halted by what Russia calls its special military operation in Ukraine, launched on February the 24th, causing global food shortages. The United Nations has appealed to both sides, as well as maritime neighbor Turkey, to agree to a corridor. NATO member Turkey has held direct talks with Russia and the UN on the corridor, but said more was needed for a deal. To agree the UN-led plan, Moscow wants some Western sanctions lifted to help facilitate its grain and fertilizer exports, and Kiev seeks security guarantees for its ports. Ankara, which has good ties with both, has said the demands are reasonable. A Turkish dry cargo ship stuck at the Ukrainian port of Mariupol under Russian control had safely departed from the port as a result. TRT said the Azov Concord vessel left Mariupol port hours after the meeting ended. And the head of the International Energy Agency has warned that Russia may stop supplying gas to Europe this winter. Faith Beryl says he believes a complete shutdown is not the most likely scenario, but that Europe needs to work on contingency plans just in case. In recent weeks, several European countries said they received significantly less Russian gas than they expected. Russian officials deny it's deliberate and have blamed technical issues. Before the invasion of Ukraine, Europe imported about 40% of its natural gas from Russia, but that figure has now fallen to about 20%. Let's take a break, and afterwards, the diary of a 12-year-old Ukrainian refugee is to be released. Please stay on with us. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. Let's talk to Laddie Williams of our business desk. I don't know why I'm rubbing my hands together, actually. But Russia is seeking new fuel markets in Africa, the Middle East, as Europe turns away.
Yeah.
This isn't really a surprise, is it?
It's not. It's not a surprise because we've seen, weak demand, from Europe. We've seen how Europe depends heavily, on Russian gas and, most of their oil exports. But, at this time, we're seeing Europe wean off, Russian oil, even though it's a really tough, decision, for Europe at this moment with the heat waves. They're needing more electricity at this time, and they need more gas, and also the winter, coming. So, and we're also seeing Russia cut, the supplies to most parts of Europe. So we're seeing Russia actually start looking for, other markets so they can still continue.
But then I seem to remember you saying that, look, yeah, they may get some of these other markets, but those markets may not be a complete replacement for their European market.
For European demand. But at the end of the day, they have to look for other options. We know China buys most of their oil, and China and India, they make a good amount of demand for, Russian oil, because selling, at a nice price there.
Price, yes. Everybody seems to come away with something from that one.
Quite competitive, prices. But they're also looking to Africa because we saw the diesel supplies to Africa was about 1 million tons from since this year started. So they've been doing a lot of supplies to Africa. We've seen countries like Nigeria, Senegal, get most of those diesel supplies, from Russia. So they're ramping up, more of that to the friendly nations.
Yeah, because they're not just selling to everybody.
Not just everybody, but the friendly nations. But, at the end of the day, there's still concerns about secondary, sanctions. So most of these countries still have to be careful, with how much they're buying. At this point, you don't want to get sanctions from, the top guns, at this point. So they're still making their sales. They're still looking for more markets. They're selling their naphthalene, the petroleum naphthalene. They're selling that to Nigeria. That's used in major production, in industry, plastic. So they're getting all those supplies into Africa and, most parts of the Middle East at this point, even though we know Africa still, has their production of oil. But there are some of these fuels, the refined fuels that still come in here, but we know what's happening right here. We see
indeed
the price of
all these items you mentioned,
into the country is getting more expensive. Subsidy bill is also
rising very fast.
Yes, at this time. So, the Europe and Germany are still making plans, see how they can wean off, by the end of this year. But we know it's a tough place. They're in a tough position, at this moment.
Now, let's go to the markets. Last week, we had a torrid time. I mean, if you talk about either the Nigerian markets or the world markets, it was a really torrid time. Quite. It seems that this week, the story is a bit different.
Yeah, it's different. It started off good, for global markets on Monday, into Tuesday. But yesterday, we saw major sell-offs again. And I did say that, when it gets towards the end of the week, that's when the sell-offs actually intensify.
Indeed, you said that yesterday.
Yeah, even into Friday. And we're already seeing that, play out. We saw the U.S. Fed Chair, Jerome Powell, actually testify to the Fed yesterday, to Congress, talking about inflation. That's the major, topic. They asked him a couple of questions about how they're tackling inflation and what caused, this inflation that we're seeing in the U.S. Right now. And he did make some comments. He said at this point, a recession is likely, and the markets did not like that because, when the most
That's
powerful...
really bad news. That's really
bad news for risk assets. So we saw investors react to that statement. He didn't say there was going to be a recession. He just said there's a possibility, of a recession. And we saw...
There are those I spoke to who said that when the equivalents of CBN governors tell you something is likely or there might be, what they're in fact telling you is to prepare for it, that it's coming.
When they sneeze, the whole market catches a cold. So we've seen that happen now. The NASDAQ, we've seen sell-offs with the NASDAQ, and even the crypto market, that also played into the crypto market. We saw Bitcoin there struggling with that $20,000 support.
Yes, it's found it a bit difficult to get out of there because earlier in the week we were a bit hopeful that, it started a rise back, and a few people were hopeful that, okay, well, this may be the start of some kind of movement back, but that hasn't proved to be the case. It doesn't,
no, because right now it's just the day traders that are, taking advantage of these swings we're seeing right now. But, for the long-term investors, it's quite painful seeing your portfolio down over 50%. But at the end of the day, we're seeing some of them have strong hands, holding through, dollar cost averaging, hoping at some point later on the markets will actually bounce back. But the day traders are having fun now. And back here, we're seeing the equities market here actually improving from last week's performance. We've had like 2 days of greens this week, and it's looking good. We're seeing a couple of investors, buying some cheap stocks at this point, doing some cherry picking, and we're seeing, that play out in the market as the all-share index went up about 50 basis points yesterday. But it remains to be seen how the market closes today and tomorrow. Hopefully,
yeah, because it was tomorrow that you were more particular about that.
Most of the
sell-offs could be against tomorrow.
Exactly.
As people prepare for the weekend and the month end as well. Indeed. But earlier on, you did reference, when we're talking about the oil supplies, something that could affect us here in Nigeria and other African countries that may have tried to switch their supplies to limit disruptions, is that the German industry is grappling with some choices at this point. And Germany is the powerhouse, the industrial powerhouse of Europe.
And they're having to make tough decisions now with, trying to wean off Russian gas and also dealing with, supply cuts, from Russia that they claim is technical, but, we know what's actually going on.
Yeah, they know, and everybody else knows.
So at the end of the day, they're having to rely on dirtier alternatives like coal. We've seen how that has impacted the environment. It's a really dirty alternative. It adds so much combustion to the atmosphere, and that disrupts. And we're seeing the global warming at this point. That's actually going to trigger that even more. Even though they've been using coal, but now they have to intensify use of coal at this point. And obviously, they're not happy. They're not happy they have to make this choice. But at the end of the day, they've now had to have an emergency meeting at about 10 a.m. Berlin time. And they've come up with a couple of plans to make sure that even though there's a shortage, the operators don't pass on the cost
to the consumers,
to
which
the
is
consumers.
where there could be real political backlash.
Exactly.
There could be some level of social problems.
They've had that meeting now. We're going to get more information on what was talked about and the decision. But the main focus was to not pass on that cost to Germans at this time.
Well, of course, when you do get those details, our viewers will get them as well. So please join Laddie Williams and Ini John Mekwa on Business Morning, which comes up right after this. And, of course, Business Incorporated later in the day. But in the meantime, thank you, Laddie.
Thank you.
Let's take a look at some of the sports emanating from this situation. FIFA has announced an extension of the temporary employment rules which were introduced to help players and coaches affected by the war in Ukraine. The regulations on the status and transfer of players introduced in March have been adjusted to give foreign players and coaches the right to suspend their employment contracts until June 30, 2023. The clause comes into force should clubs affiliated to the Ukrainian Association of Football or the Football Union of Russia not reach a mutual agreement with their respective foreign players and coaches before next week. FIFA added that the restrictions do not apply to those under the age of 18. And players from Russia will know next month whether they will be able to play at the World Team Table Tennis Championships Finals in Chengdu. The International Table Tennis Federation, the ITTF, has scheduled an executive council meeting for July the 26th and 27th, where a decision is to be made. Athletes and officials from Russia and Belarus were banned by the ITTF in March in line with International Olympic Committee recommendations in response to the breach of the Olympic truce when the nations participated in the invasion of Ukraine during the peace period. Provisionally, Russia have a team entered in the championships in both the men and women's tournaments, making up a field of 40 teams in each. And we end the program today with the reflections of a 12-year-old refugee from the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which will be published on October the 25th. Yeva Seletsky's book is called You Don't Know What War Is, the diary of a young girl from Ukraine. Seletsky said in a statement released that everyone knows what the word war means, but practically no one knows what this word really represents. I want the world to know what we have experienced. Seletsky's book begins with her 12th birthday, shortly before the Russians attacked on February the 24th. She had been living in Kharkiv with her grandmother when the bombing began. She describes the bombings they endured while sheltering underground and their desperate journey to western Ukraine. She shares her confusion about why the Russians would attack them, since she speaks Russian and follows many of their customs. All right, so we'll wait for that. It'll be interesting to know what a 12-year-old thinks of war. But she's right about one thing, though. You may know what war means, but until you've experienced it, you don't really know. That's where we wrap up the program. My name is Laddie Akeredoluale. Do join us for an update at 5 o'clock within the world today. But for now, do have a pleasant day ahead.